General citizenry who affect those who make decisions. But what we had just seen is not the future that must be. And I think that's the most important thing for us all to take away from this experience tonight. This movie shows the future that will be if we don't change course. But it is not the future that must be. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature over which we have no control. They are the work of our own hands. They're small machines about the size of the chairs we just as we're sitting in this evening. We know how to take them apart. We have just, until this point, lacked, as a global community, the political will to do that. And that is what needs to change. And that is the job that we all have before us. How do we bring about that change? As I said, I think the key to this is education. I think that the vast majority of people in the world today are profoundly ill-informed about this danger. They don't know that it exists. The film mentioned that there is scant attention in the media to the danger of nuclear war. That was in 1965. Well, that's where we are today as well. There have been times that have been different, and we need to know about those as well. In the early 1980s, there was a tremendously energetic movement around the world, in the United States, in Europe, in the Soviet Union, demanding an end to the Cold War arms race, because people then did know about the danger of nuclear war. If you ask people then what are the great problems facing the world, preventing nuclear war was number one, number two on everybody's list. Today, if you pose that question in the survey, nuclear weapons don't even register on most people's lists. But the important thing for us to remember is that when people did understand in the 1980s the danger that nuclear weapons posed, millions of them took action. And that action led to a profound change in nuclear weapons policy. In 1981, Ronald Reagan became president of the United States, pledging to make it possible for us to, I'm quoting him, fight and win a nuclear war in Europe. And we built weapons to do just that. And we came within moments, on multiple occasions, of fighting that nuclear war and enduring the horror that this film has shown to us tonight. But within 4 short years, all that changed. Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev said together that nuclear war could never be won, it must never be fought. They ended the Cold War arms race, and they began the process of dismantling the vast arsenals that existed at that time. And so we know that when we educate the public, when we all take action, we can bring about profound, fundamental change in nuclear policy. The challenge before us today is to do again what we have done once already. When the Cold War ended, people stopped paying attention to this problem. And that inattention to this existential threat is in many ways the greatest danger of all. And so it is our job, those of us who now know about the danger that we face, to make sure that everyone else does as well. And there's some very hopeful signs. Around the world, many countries have come together to adopt, sign, and ratify the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. A treaty that was negotiated at the insistence of countries that do not have nuclear weapons, who understand the threat posed by the arsenals of those who do, not just to the people of those countries that are armed with nuclear weapons, but to the entire world. And these countries came together and said they do not want their people to be held hostage any longer to the insane nuclear policies of the 9 countries that have them. 122 nations voted on July 7, 2017 to adopt this treaty. 86 have signed it so far, and 51 have ratified the treaty. 55 have ratified the treaty, so that it is now entered into force. None of the nuclear armed states are among that list of countries which have taken this step. And so for those of us who live here in the United States, one of the two great nuclear superpowers, our task is clear. We need to bring about a situation where our government understands the enormity of the danger it faces, the enormity of the danger it is posing to the rest of the world, and fundamentally changes its nuclear policy. To that end, many of us here in the United States have launched a campaign called Back from the Brink, a call to prevent nuclear war. It is modeled on the Freeze campaign of the early 1980s in that it provides a platform, a prescription of what US nuclear policy should be as opposed to what it is. And it calls on the United States to begin now negotiations with the other 8 nuclear armed states for a verifiable, enforceable, time-bound agreement to eliminate their remaining nuclear weapons so that they are all in compliance with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and can sign and ratify that treaty. The Back from the Brink platform also calls on the United States to take some intermediate steps right now, unilaterally, to lower the danger of an inadvertent nuclear war and to give momentum to the movement to eliminate all nuclear weapons. It calls on the United States to adopt no first use policy, to promise it will never use nuclear weapons first. It calls on the United States to end the situation where the President of the United States can launch nuclear war on his or her sole authority without anyone else being able to weigh in. It calls on the United States to take our nuclear weapons off air trigger alert so they can't be launched by accident in a moment of poor judgment as a result of a cyber attack. And it calls on the United States to forego the plans to spend $1.7 to $2 trillion over the next 3 decades to enhance every single element of our nuclear arsenal. Today, 350 organizations around the country, including Physicians for Social Responsibility, Veterans for Peace, As Peace Action, and many others, have endorsed this call. It's also been endorsed by more than 50 municipalities, cities, and towns across the country, and by 6 state legislative bodies. And right at this moment, we are asking local elected officials all around the country to sign on to a letter to President Biden endorsing this course of action as well. There are brochures on the table at the back of the room that explain this campaign and that give you instructions on how you can contact your local elected officials and ask them to sign on to this letter, which has been signed at this point by 180 local officials around the country, including more than 30 here in Massachusetts. But there are lots more we need to reach with this message. So, all of us, I think, are pretty overwhelmed by this experience we've been through tonight. It is natural, after seeing something like this, to want to forget about it. This has been very unpleasant, and the way we deal with this is to put it out of mind. But we can't do that. Because if we put this out of mind, if we don't think about nuclear war, and talk to people about nuclear war, and take action to prevent nuclear war, then we're going to have a nuclear war. And that's the reality that we're in, as horrible and unpleasant as it is to think about that. There are 2 great existential threats before humanity today: the climate crisis and the prospect of nuclear war. And we need to address both of them. And we need to address them both with equal urgency because they're both imminent threats to the survival of our civilization, to the survival of hundreds of millions, billions of people. But again, we have the ability to forestall these disasters. It is not written in the stars that we will die in nuclear war. And I think we need to take great hope from the successes we had in the past. And we also need to approach this whole problem, I think, with the spirit of what it is that we can do. You know, every one of us wants to do something good with his or her life. Those of us living today have been given the opportunity to save the world, which is the best thing anyone can ever do. And so while this is a terrible responsibility that we bear, it is also an extraordinary opportunity to give it the greatest gift we can to our children, our grandchildren, and those who will come after us. To give them the opportunity, as one of the people in the movie said, just to grow up, to enjoy this beautiful world and to not have to be in fear that it will all be taken away from them. So, do the things you need to do to protect yourself psychologically from the pain that we're all feeling right now. But don't forget what we've all learned tonight by watching this movie. None of us is expected to solve this problem on our own. But each one of us has to do that part of the job which is hardest to do. And if we all do that, we're going to succeed. Just like we stopped the Cold War arms race in the 80s, we can end the nuclear weapons era once and for all and get rid of these weapons. And that is the challenge before us, and which I hope all of us will take up. So let me stop talking and take any questions people might have, and more importantly, comments that people might have about things that we can do to bring about the fundamental change in nuclear policy that we need to bring about. I have bright lights in my eyes and I can't see anybody's hands if they're up. So if people want to speak, please just stand up and talk.
Father Morris from Regent Peace. Just address and tell us the senior level in Massachusetts what different politicians are taking the nation. What are their positions here in Massachusetts? All politics is over.
Well, we're fortunate that several of our representatives in Congress have been real champions of efforts to deal with the nuclear threat. Senator Markey, Senator Warren, both sponsored legislation to adopt a first use policy. They sponsored legislation to cut military spending on nuclear weapons. Congressman McGovern, my congressman in the western part of the state, has also played a very important role in this effort. But I think even they need more product because this, there's a lot of issues out there that compete for people's attention. And it's hard to focus on this one, which is kind of abstract. Hunger is taking place every day in our cities. The drug crisis is taking place every day. The COVID epidemic is taking place every day. This is something which isn't, thank God, taking place every day. And so it's kind of hard for people to focus on it. So even the very proactive members of our congressional delegation who have addressed this issue need our support and they need our encouragement to do more. And the rest of the congressional delegation, we need to speak to. We need to get all of them to be voting against this insane plan to spend nearly $2 trillion on more nuclear weapons. And we need to get them to use their position as members of Congress to put pressure on the administration to change nuclear policy. The US government is currently undergoing what's called the nuclear posture review. Each administration, each presidential administration conducts one of these. And this nuclear posture review is just beginning this month. It will lead to a new nuclear policy statement, probably in January or February of next year, that will set US policy for the coming administration, possibly the next 4 or the next 8 years. If that statement reflects the policies of the past, we are in terrible trouble. What we need to have is a nuclear posture statement emerge from these deliberations that understands that nuclear weapons do not protect us, that they are the greatest threat to our security, and they need to be eliminated. And that's possible. I'm not optimistic, but it's possible. This is a fundamental review of policy that's being undertaken at this time. And we need to get our state delegation in Congress and our local elected officials to raise their voices and tell the administration we want that fundamental change in nuclear policy. Answer that question.
Speak up.
It's very important. a very important point. There are victims today of the ongoing nuclear enterprise, not just people who killed at Hiroshima, but people who were exposed to radiation through testing, who manufactured weapons through mining, and so on. I think we need to be clear, though, that as horrible as those health effects have been, and as indefensible as the experiences those people were subjected to, they do not begin to approach the scope of the danger that we are now facing. But they are an important reminder of the ongoing danger. And of course, there are the health issues that these people face that need to be addressed now as well.
On a practical level, how would you encourage people, voters particularly, say, and I'll use an example, I live in Rhode Island, Senator Jack Reed is considered nobility amongst folks among the left and the progressive movement because of his stances that are very progressive on every issue except war. How do we separate the necessity to continually challenge Senator Jack Reed, who is the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, a graduate of West Point, a clear member of the military-industrial complex, perhaps one of the most powerful men in the world? How do we get the average, not the people who are here, but the average progressive voter to understand that his stance on nuclear war and war in general outweighs whatever positives he has in pearl clutching for other issues?
Well, you know, again, I think we broke the record. I think it's a question of education. I think we need to try to reach out to as many people in the progressive community and the general community in Rhode Island and educate them about the decisions the Senator Reed has taken on nuclear weapons and about the need to have a very different nuclear policy. It is difficult, especially when you have someone who is progressive on other issues. I think part of the problem is we need to have people understand the primacy of these two issues, climate change and preventing nuclear war. All the other things that we're doing today, and they're very, very important. 1,000 years from now, no one's going to care if you had a good healthcare system, if you had insurance for everyone, if there are unemployment benefits. All they're going to care about is, did we prevent a climate crisis? Did we prevent nuclear war? And we need to help people understand that, not saying that we shouldn't work on these other important issues, but that these two issues are in a category that's quite different, a category by themselves. They are the only two existential threats we face. And if we don't deal with them, nothing else that we do is going to matter, because no one's going to be here to enjoy the benefits of the other. I don't know if that's it.
No, that's spot on. It's the challenge is actually, as you say, doing it, but voices like yours goad us on, spur us on to having that deep dive. And you know, American politics is short attention span theater, right? I mean, how do we get folks to concentrate? And a movie like this, you know, how do we get that mass appeal to what everyone in this room clearly believes?
This movie, by the way, is easily available. We hope to do some additional theater screenings, especially as hopefully as the COVID pandemic hopefully passes and we're able to do more in live events. But it's also available online, and it's something that people can show to other audiences that they have access to, their faith communities, their Rotary clubs, their other civic groups, whatever. And I think this, you know, is one of the most powerful tools that we have, because it does it personalizes this. You know, it's not just a flash of statistics. These are these people who we see with our eyes who, you know, suffer. What is going to happen to all of us if this ever happens? So it's enormously powerful. We should take advantage of it and produce it.
Question over
there. Yeah, speak at this point. I just want to say that I think rather than say there's other naggers that are taking all of our attention, you know, you don't have to context. There's actually so all the money we're not spending on the COVID situation, what has become very apparent, a great disparity, a great inequity. What's happening to people in the evicted from their homes because of the impact of, you know, COVID and losing And we got to focus on this nuclear disaster and climate change. Yes, we do. And purchase our money towards things that really make people's lives better. This would be a benefit for everybody in the world. Because we all benefit more from peaceful and see what our common needs are as a whole. So how do we bring these dialogues together versus we got to focus on
Thank you for that comment. And I think what you said is absolutely true. As long as we're spending these enormous sums of money on nuclear weapons and on the military in general, those resources are not available to deal with the other problems that we need to deal with as a society. I would just simply add one other caution, which is it is possible to substantially cut the military budget and still have an enormous nuclear arsenal. The nuclear expenditure is obscene, but it's about $50 billion a year. The total Pentagon budget is $700 billion. Unless we make the specific case that nuclear weapons need to be eliminated, and with that political argument, then just cutting the military budget is not necessarily going to get us what we need to get to with regards to nuclear weapons. The reason I talk about climate crisis too, right now, the great nuclear powers, US, Russia, China, the major players, they're all engaged in this really insane competition to see who's going to be, the hegemon, who's going to end up on top of the world. And they're engaged in this competition because the whole world is falling apart around them, which they don't seem to understand. We need to have a real paradigm shift in the way that the great powers, all countries behave, so that they understand that it doesn't matter who's on top, if they're on top of an ash heap. They need to understand that they can no longer afford to spend their time and their energy and their resources competing with each other. They have to work together to deal with things like the COVID epidemic, like the climate crisis. And I don't think we pose this to them as this is a moral thing, this is the way it ought to be because it's the moral thing to do. It certainly is that. But this is the way they have to act because this is the way they have to act if they're going to survive. It's a very pragmatic, practical message that we're trying to bring to these people in leadership. And that in some ways is I think, perhaps the key to our success. If we can get them to understand the enormity of the danger that they face with business as usual, perhaps we can get them to do all the right things that they need to do. Sorry,
you see the Biden administration heading to disarm nuclear weapons, or do you think he's on the course of building more?
It's hard to know. I think at the moment, the signals that we've gotten are that he's put forward a budget that includes spending on new nuclear weapons. There are people in this administration who oppose this, who believe that we need to eliminate nuclear weapons. There are clearly people in the administration who are all in on let's have a big nuclear arsenal. And that's the background for this nuclear posture review that's going on. It's not completely clear which school of thought is going to win that internal debate. I think the odds are not great for our side winning. The momentum seems to be towards a continuation of the basic nuclear policy of the last 70 years, which is to rely on the nuclear arsenal. President Biden himself has said some things that indicate that is not his thinking, but it's not totally clear what he thinks. And it's also most importantly not clear how much political effort he's going to invest in this, which just goes to the question that we were just talking about a minute ago. No administration that has had the understanding of the issue of nuclear weapons has been willing to devote the political capital towards bringing about that policy change. Obama flirted with the idea, got a lot of pushback, and just decided essentially that it wasn't that important, that he needed to use his political capital to do other things. And again, that's part of our job to get the leadership to understand this is that important. This is, along with climate change, the most important issue that you have to deal with. Again, we're not saying not to deal with the other issues, but you've got to deal with these two, and nothing else ultimately will matter.
As I understand it, Russia has evolved, and the United States is second.
That's right, and they're very similar numbers. It's about 6,000 in Charleston. The Russians have a few more, but obviously doesn't make any difference. We could have a third, and then we could have a 10th, and then we still have enough to destroy Russia. And
disgraceful. I said it's disgraceful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
So it's like which is understandable.
Well, I think that's a really fundamental and correct point that you made. Like the line is a problem. People are not thinking about this. They're pretending the problem doesn't exist. They're pretending it went away. I think the problem is this is maybe even more so than it was in early years of the weapons era, because the world collectively breathed such sigh of relief when the Cold War ended. You know, we dodged the bullet. We weren't going to have a nuclear war we all feared. That we kind of just can't bring ourselves to the realization that we didn't dodge the bullet. It's still flying around, ricocheting off the walls. And we've just been lucky that we haven't been hit so far. I don't know what the answer to this question is. It's something I think about all the time. We achieved something quite remarkable in the 1980s in terms of the level of understanding that we were able to create in the general public. And we have not been able to recreate that understanding in recent years. I don't know what we did different then. I'm not sure what was different. And I think that's something for all of us to think hard about. Part of what we did then was just to keep doing the work. Showing movies on this, giving lectures, talking, organizing. And at a certain point, we sort of reached a, sorry, this critical mass is the only really good term for this. We reached a critical mass, and the movement really took off. To me, the simple-minded response to this problem is just to keep doing the work, to keep talking to people, and to hope that we again reach that critical mass where people find themselves talking about the struggle. One of the problems is, you know, we all come to an event like this tonight. We see this movie, we leave terribly concerned and determined to do something about it. And then, as you were just suggesting, we don't hear about this for weeks. You know, in the 80s, you hear the next day there'd be something in the newspapers and there'd be something on the news. And you'd be constantly reminded of why it was that what you just learned was so important. Now, when I'm talking to audiences, not like this one, which has selected itself to come to an event like this, but say I'm talking to a college class, the reaction I get is these people really, you know, the students, they get it. They understand what I've said. But then day after day goes by, they don't hear about it again. And they don't want to think about this because it's horrible to think about. And they're able to convince themselves, well, that guy sounded convincing and spoke to us, but he must be wrong, because if they were really this big a danger, we'd be hearing about it all the time. So somehow we have to make people hear about it all the time. We have to keep talking about it. I mean, simple things. Writing letters to the editor, it's really valuable. It's not in the press usually. If people read the letter to the editor page, and especially in the local newspapers, people start reading letters to the editor all the time and talk about nuclear war. You know, it starts to happen. But this, we need a lot of good creative thought to do this. Yes.
Yeah. First off, thank you for participating in this. Thank you for everyone that's involved in such a wonderful event, such a wonderful space. Thank you very much. I guess my question to you would be, where do we draw the line between production and like development / research? So that's to say, like, every country in the world agreed, all right, let's destroy all weapons, which I think everybody would be in favor of. Can you then also ban research on how to develop
So I don't think we can ban the research, or this is a genie that can't get put in the bottle. Go on the internet and figure out there are simple directions on how to build a nuclear weapon. The place where we can intervene is with the supply of fissile material, because plutonium and high-enriched uranium are very difficult to produce. There are limited stockpiles on the planet which need to be brought under international control. They need to be, we don't have a good way of storing this stuff in the long term, but the intermediate steps that we do have at hand need to be implemented so that these materials are rendered into a form where they cannot be assembled into nuclear warheads. And then we need to completely ban the future production of high-enriched uranium. And if we do that, that breaks the chain. Without fissile material, even if you know how to build a nuclear weapon, you can't do it. And that's where we have our leverage. This is where we can interrupt this process.
Yeah, but the fissile material also has other things that it's used for. Right? I'm a big it has benefits for power too, correct? So like we need to go on to that in weapons and being able to convert.
Well, I think this is one of the arguments why we shouldn't have nuclear power, because it is inextricably linked to the process of building nuclear weapons. And any country that has a nuclear power industry has the ability to purify enriched uranium and build nuclear weapons. That's one of the major arguments against nuclear power. There are others in terms of how dangerous it is. And that's something we're going to have to deal with as well, because we are going to have to stop the production of fissile material. We don't need nuclear power. It is not the solution to the climate crisis. We need to focus on true renewables like wind and solar and so on. And I think we need to forego nuclear energy for just the reason that you're suggesting. Because if we have a nuclear energy industry, it is going to be impossible to safeguard against the development of nuclear weapons in the future.
Why can't other intelligent people merge together like your organization, like that, and collaborate and deal with the media that is not exposing this stuff, and deal with the schools that are not bringing this up over and over and showing stuff like this, and help us deal with what we need to do to educate and influence our politicians. Because all of that is what's really needed. A certain plan like the building of this facility. It took 7 years, you know that. We were part of the school. So impressive that you were. What about building this? Somebody's got to sacrifice a lot of years just for this. And many other things that I can't even think of right now, but it's pulling together in a different way. But we're isolated in this state and that state. And act right here. I also want to remind you on this at the front desk, these little cranes that are pins are to remind the people about this issue. The business to be with the conversation.
Thank you. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was brought about by a partnership between a number of far-sighted visionary government leaders around the world and an extraordinary mobilization of civil society in the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which was, in fact, led by some older people, but a lot of young people who played a critical role in this whole campaign to get the treaty adopted and the ongoing effort to get more countries to ratify the treaty. Here in the United States, we have hoped that the Back from the Brink campaign would be something like the ICANN campaign. It was modeled with that very much in mind, and as a vehicle that could bring people together across the country who are concerned about this issue with a common demand. People organize, I can't demand that there be a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. The central demand of the Back and Quit campaign that the United States commit to the elimination of its nuclear arsenal and undertake the final negotiations that still need to be done for the verification and enforcement provisions and the timetable for actually eliminating the nuclear arsenal. And it is my hope that this campaign, which has grown very dramatically in the last 4 years, will in fact be able to mobilize people around the country in a way that leads to the elimination of these weapons.
Dr. Helfand, I just wanted to ask one final question before we move on to the vision center. Speak to what we saw in the film tonight as a physician. Also, to ask if your work against nuclear weapons, if you see that as sort of a fulfillment of the oath that you took as a doctor.
Thanks for that question, Brian. My involvement in the nuclear weapons issue has very much flowed from my work as a physician. And the medical community as a whole has at times explicitly stated that this is part of our mission, that nuclear weapons are the greatest public health threat in the world, and that as physicians and other health professionals who are committed to protecting public health, we need to address this issue. The film, watching that as a physician, the thing that struck me, of course, was the utter futility of the efforts to tend to the victims. And this has been a central part of our message. You know, what motivated many of us initially to become involved was the idea back in the 60s and then especially in the early 80s that somehow a nuclear war was survivable and that it would be bad, but we'd patch it back together again. The medical community was assumed to play a large role in that patching back together to take care of the victims. And as this movie made very clear, as we understood at that time, that isn't possible. No significant medical response can be found, even to the explosion of a single nuclear weapon in one city, let alone widespread use of nuclear weapons across the entire country. And the statistic that was given, I think, calculated in this case that each physician would have 350 patients, all who severely injured. That is the reality. That's what it would be like. And there's nothing that even the most dedicated, hardworking doctor, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, therapist could do, really. Would be putting band-aids on lethal injuries. And so part of the message that we have felt important to bring is just that. Don't look to us to sort of fix the world after nuclear war because you can't do it. And in medicine, if you have an illness that cannot be treated, cannot be cured, then you have to prevent it. And that's the bottom line. We cannot afford to have a nuclear war. We must at all costs prevent this. So again, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, for putting themselves through this experience. I've thought a lot today about my dear Francesco Thorlo, who is one of the greatest and most generous people I've ever met. She's a doctor woman who accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of ICANN in 2017. She was 13 on the day of the attack in 1945, and she has spent her entire life since then talking about this. She makes herself relive the experience she went through that day over and over and over again to bring an understanding to people all around the world of what's at stake here and to try to make sure that nobody else has to go through what she went through that day. We had sort of a very, very minor version of that tonight, having to witness the horror in this film. We all have to have the same kind of courage and generosity of spirit and determination going forward to share this information with everybody that we can. And again, if we do this, we can succeed. We can get rid of these weapons. This does not have to happen. Our children and our grandchildren can have the life that they deserve. Thanks again very much for coming out tonight.
Thank you so much. One more round of applause for Dr. Ira Helfand. Extremely insightful. Thank you for taking the time to answer our questions. Before everyone heads out for the night, I invite you all to join us for a vigil right around the corner in Arlington Center. I have electronic candles as well as signs and banners for us all to hold. So we can raise awareness of the passersby going up and down Massachusetts Avenue. And just to echo some of the remarks from Ira, people are going to ask you next week, oh, hey, what'd you do this weekend? Tell them about this movie. Tell them about why it was important to you to come out and see it. Make that pledge that you'll tell 5 of your friends and family about why abolishing nuclear weapons is important to you. And ask them to spread the word too. Because like Dr. Helfand said, it's not enough for us to just experience this and then put it out of our minds. We're being called to make a difference. It may sound corny, but it's not inaccurate to say that what we're being called to do is save the world and save the species, to save our human race for the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. So go forth and tell others what you saw tonight and why it's important that what we saw on the screen never comes to pass. So please meet me at the back of the theater. I'll be there with signs and candles, and let's go spread the word right now. Thank you all for coming.